Today we will be estimating percents. And so they have a little chart in the textbook that might help you out. This gives you some of the percents to look at. If we have a 10% or something close to a 10%, we can use 1/10 as the fraction form. Or if it's 66 2/3 or some percent close to that, we could use 2/3. Well, there's others too, so this is just a small portion of the different percents that are equivalent to some fractions. So what we're going to do first is use fractions to estimate the percent of each of these numbers. So let's take a look at this first one here. And so when I'm looking at 21% of 82, I'm going to look at my chart here to help me out to figure out what percent is close to 21. Well, when I look at it, here 20% is pretty close. I'm going to use 1/5. So what we're going to do is in place of 1/5, or in place of 21%, we're going to use 1/5. Now, of, this sign right here, this word, always tells us to multiply. And so we're going to end up multiplying some numbers here. So multiply by 82. But instead of 82, let's fix this number so that 5 goes into it. And so instead of 82, I'm going to round it to a number that is a little bit easier to deal with. Well, 82 is close to 80. It's closer to 80 than 85, so I'm going to use 80 instead of 82. And then I'm going to do some reducing. So I'm going to take out a common factor of 5. You see, 5 goes into both 5 and 80, so I can reduce it. So think of nickels. How many nickels makes 80 cents? Well, if you can figure that out, you know how many times 5 goes into 80, and that's 16 times. So there's your answer right there. So this is called estimating. When we estimate, the math shouldn't be too terribly hard, but it's important you know some factors of numbers, or numbers divisibility rules and such. So let's take a look at the next one here. Here we have 35%. Let's take a look at what percent is that close to. Well, it's pretty close to this one, 33 1/3, which is 1/3. So 35%, instead of using that number, I'm going to end up using 1/3. And so, again, that of means to multiply. And we're going to use 42 this time. The reason I'm using 42 is because I know 3 goes into 42. The rule for 3, the divisibility rule, you can divide by 3 when you can sum the digits. See, if I take 4 and I add 2, you see how it equals 6. Well, 3 goes into 6. So that's why I'm going to go ahead and stick with the number 42. So think of that as a fraction and do the reducing and divide, basically. All you have to do is divide 3 into 42. Let's see how many times it goes in there. Let's see if we can do it in our head. 3 goes into 4 one time. Okay, we got that. How much is left over? 3 into 4 one time, 1 left over. So think of this as like 12 now. 3 into 12 goes 4 times. There it is, 14. See, it's just an approximation. Don't have to use a calculator. Kind of do a lot of the work in your head. Let's take a look at the next one here. We've got a 47%. Oh, what's 47 close to? Well, let's take a look at our chart here. 47 is pretty close to 50. Let's use a half. Let's use 1/2. Of means to multiply. And let's go ahead and just use that 164. So if we use 164, you're just taking half of those numbers. Now, it seems tough. 2 into 164, but think of it in parts. How about 2 into 16? Well, 2 goes into 16 8 times, evenly. So then you just have to do 2 into 4. Well, that goes 2 times. There's your answer, 82. And so let's take a look at the next one. Now, again, some of these answers might vary a little bit depending on how you ended up changing some of these numbers. But these are going to be, again, these are just estimates. These are numbers that are close to the answer. 65%, what's that close to? Well, looking at the chart right here, 66 2/3 is close to 2/3. So this is a little bit tougher fraction to deal with because we have a number on top of the fraction. So let's try figuring this one out. Well, let's take a look at this 78. Let's see if 3 goes into it. Let's take those two numbers and add them in your head. 7 plus 8. Well, let's see here. That makes 15. Oh, yeah. 3 goes into 15. So I know 3 goes into 78. So let's use 78. All right, so let's go ahead and do the work. 3 into 7. That goes in there 2 times, so I know I have a 2. Now, there's 1 left over, because 3 times 2 makes 6, so 1 left over. So I put a little 1 right here next to the 8, and think of that as 18. 3 into 18, that goes 6 times. So there, we've done the math. We did it in our head. Now all we have to do is double 26. You have to multiply this 2. So if I multiply this 2 now, I have to multiply by that 26. So that's what I'm doing next. So that's how I'm getting the answer of 52 as our answer. So I doubled 6, I got 12. Doubled 2, you get 4, plus 1 makes 5, so 52. 5%. Oh, wow. Well, 5%, it's not on here. It's close to 10, but close to 0. Well, let's do this. Let's go ahead and think of 5%. Think of nickels. How many nickels makes a dollar? 20 nickels makes a dollar. So 5% is just 1/20th. So 5 cents is 1/20th of a dollar. Think of it this way. What's half of 10? 5. Well, half of 1/10 is 1/20th. So I'm going to use 5% as 1 over 20. And so now, this 75, 20 doesn't go into 75 evenly. And remember, this is estimation. We're estimating, so we don't need an exact answer. We're just trying to come up with something close. Let's use 80. 80 is pretty close to 75. And so now we can go ahead and do the division. Now, I didn't pick 70 because 20 doesn't really go into 70. So I picked a number that 20 I know goes into, and I want to be able to do the work in my head. So these zeros will cancel out. Those zeros are gone. And so now we just have 2 into 8. And 2 goes into 8 4 times. Hey, there's our answer, just 4. All right, well, let's take a look at the next one here. 77. What's that pretty close to? Not on our chart, but let's think of some numbers. Well, here we had 25. We've had 50. Let's try 75. Let's change this to 75%. Well, 75%, what is the fraction form of that? It is 3 over 4. So that's the number we're going to use. Now, let's change this 128 or 198 so that 4 will go into it. Well, I know 4 goes into 20, so let's use 200. See, I have to do 4 into 20 first, and then add that 0 at the end. So let's see what happens here. And so we go ahead and do some work, and we're going to do 4 into 20 goes 5 times. And then I add that 0. And then I just multiply across. I'm multiplying that 3 by 50. And that makes 150. And there it is. Well, let's take a look at our next problem here. And when I see that one, so that is estimating with changing a percent to a fraction. Let's take a look at another set of directions that asks us to use 1 or 10% to estimate. So what does that mean? Let's figure that out. So let's go ahead and start with number 14 there. And it says 32% of 46. So what they want us to do is this. Basically, they're going to group these numbers or change this to the nearest tenth. If it's a number like 30 or 20 or 70 or something like that in those values there. So this is pretty close to 30%. Well, 30%, all that is 3 times by 10%. That's all it is. So it's 3 groups of 10%. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 10% of a number. And it's so easy taking 10% of a number because the numbers don't change. It's just the decimal point that changes. So let's just see how that ends up working. If you did, see, 10% is the same thing as 0.1. And if we took 46 times by 0.1, look what happens. You get the same numbers, 4, 6. But we got to move the decimal back 1 space, so it makes 4.6. So that's all it is. And so all you're going to end up doing is just taking 46 and multiplying it by 10%. So we'll write down, we'll do 0.1 times by 4.6. And when we do that, again, actually at 46, and it's going to equal that 4.6. All right, so now we got that 4.6. What are we going to do with the 3? Well, you're going to triple this number, because this is only 10% of 46 is 4.6. Now let's triple that number. So now we have to do 4 6/10 times by 3. And so when we do that, 3 times 6 makes 18. Carry a 1. 3 times 4 makes 12, plus 1 makes 13. And so we end up with 13.8. So it's a great way to find a percentage by, well, if it's pretty close to a number like, let's say like 32 or 30, something close to a 30 or a 40 or a 50 or something in that range. Now, if it was like a 75 or something like that, well, then you're going to be a little bit further off because we're having to round this number a bit. So 81% is a great one, again, for using this method. Again, when the number's close to a value that's close to a tens, like an 80, a 90, or a 70 or a 60, it's a great method. So let's change this 81%. We're going to do 8 times by 10%. So we're going to take 10%, so 0.1, times by 36. 10% of 36 is just 3.6. But then we've got to do that 3 6/10 times by 8, because there's 8 groups of 10 here. So we go ahead and do that. That makes 48. Carry a 4. 8 times 3 makes 24, plus 4 makes 28. So there it is. 28 and 8/10 was our good approximation of that number. 3% of 72. Here's one where you can still use this method, but here we're going to do 1%. So like for instance, 1% is the same thing as 0.01. So you're having to move the decimal 1 2 spaces this time. So you're going to do 3 groups of 1%. So 3 times by 1%. So we need 1%, so 0.01 times by 72. Well, that just makes 72 hundredths. All right, well, we're not done yet. We still have to take that 3 and multiply it by that 0.72. So you go ahead and do that. You get a 6 for 3 times 2. 3 times 7 makes 21, and you move that decimal 2 spaces, and you've got your answer, 2 16 hundredths. Well, let's take a look at another problem here. We've got a word problem. The new package of Marty's snack contains 20% more snack mix than the old package. There were 22 ounces in the old package. Well, let's go ahead, and they want an about, so that means to estimate. So let's go ahead, use some easier numbers. Let's figure out what 20% is. What's 20% more? Well, all we have to do is do this. 22, well, let's change that number. Let's change this to, this is about, so that's what the squiggly equal sign means, just about 20. Let's take 20% of this number. Let's do 0.2 times by 20. 20 is about 22. 20%, well, that's where the 0.2 came from. That just makes 40, and then you move the decimal. So 4 ounces. That's how much was added. That's more snack mix. So what's in the news package? Well, all we're going to do is take the original 22 and add that extra amount, 4. So we get 26 ounces. That's what's in the new. And again, this is just an about. We didn't use the exact because I rounded 22 to about 20. Now let's take a look at one more problem here. It says Darden has $35 to spend on a backpack. He has one that's off 35% from the regular price of $43.99. So let's do this. Let's change this 35%. This is a great one for that 33 1/3, which is about 1/3. Okay, so we're going to use that number. 1/3 is the number we're going to use. We're going to change this 43 99 hundredths of a dollar to $45 because 3 goes into that number. So let's do it. 1/3 times by 45 over 1. 3 goes into 45 15 times. $15. That's what he's saving. He's not going to pay that $15. So let's find out how much that'll end up costing. Let's take the price, $45. Again, we just rounded it. We're just making the math easy. And let's subtract that 15 that he's not going to pay. That's $30. That's how much about this is going to end up costing. Let's see if he has enough money. Yeah, he's got $35 to spend. So $35, well, that's greater than 30. So yes, he has enough. 30 is smaller than 35. Looks like he's going to end up making it. Well, those are the problems you'll end up seeing on tonight's homework. Good luck.